Hello everyone, I hope you're all well. I have quite a few new subscribers since my last video, so I should probably say hello and actually introduce myself, which I should always do at the beginning of videos, and I never do. So hello again, my name is Claire, and I work in publishing, I live in London, and I love classics and history books, which will be very evident from all of the books that I'm probably going to show you now. And I've been making booktube videos for 12 years, I think. So it's been a long time, but I'm really glad that you've found my channel. And if you are new, please introduce yourself, because it would be lovely to get to know some new people in this new year. This video is a direct link back to the last video I uploaded, which was talking about my favourite reads of 2023 and kind of my reading reflections via the postscript book tag. So this video is kind of like an old-fashioned, proper YouTube video response to my own video. At the moment, I'm kind of in between books, and kind of because I am currently reading a book, but I always have at least 2 books on the go. They're nearly always one novel and one piece of non-fiction, like a history book, and I always struggle when I have 2 books on the go, because what's my brain supposed to do in between? Like, I need some kind of, almost like a refresher, and just to switch in between. And often I also read in different formats as well, so I'll read a paperback and an audiobook. Audiobooks are actually my favourite, I think, yeah, my favourite reading format. I love audiobooks. But I was kind of looking back and I was like, I have so many books I want to read, but I don't really know what. And so I thought I'd make this video, talk about some books, and then also hopefully give you some kind of inspo for your reading year this year. For me, when I think about reading, it's kind of like a continuation. It's a journey I'm going on, and every year informs the other year, which is kind of why I can never really predict that I'm definitely going to read a book in a certain year, because it really changes. It's like this tapestry that I'm kind of starting in one year, and then as I'm going, I'm learning more about myself, and over time that kind of changes the tapestry. I don't know why I'm making a reference to any craft, because actually I have no idea how to do any craft, never mind make a tapestry. I wouldn't even know where to start. But the tapestry of life is kind of what I'm trying to get at there. When I look back at my reading journal, it's so clear to me that every year kind of leads on for me. I mean, of course it leads on for the last one, but even in terms of my interest, you can see where I've read one book and the next year I've been inspired to further explore that topic or read a new book by that author. And so this is really a video not just about some of the books I might read this year, but it's also just a little bit of a nod to the person that I was in 2023 and what I discovered in 2023 by the books I've read in that year and how they've inspired the reading that I hope to do this year. This isn't necessarily TBR because I'm a mood reader and I might read none of these books, but I know that quite a few of the books that I mentioned in my favourite books of 2023 are ones that you've either read or loved, or also just books that I haven't talked about that I've really enjoyed and want to talk about a bit more. This is a very Claire specific, if you liked this, you'll enjoy this kind of video. So let's get started. The first book that's really inspired my 2024 TBR pile is of course Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I've talked about my rereading of this book in quite a few videos now, and it is just one of my favourite novels of all time. I think we can also all agree that this 1995 edition with Jennifer Ely and Colin Firth on it is just absolutely iconic. This edition of Pride and Prejudice also directly inspired me to buy this edition of the complete novels of Jane Austen. I've always wanted a complete novels and just to sit and read them all from a really big chunky book. But as soon as you see Colin and Jennifer, I also love, Jennifer Ely is also my Lizzie Bennet, but I just had to buy this. So I am going to read more Jane Austen 2024, and I think the novel that I'm going to reread is Emma, because that's a novel that I didn't get around to like fully rereading in 2023. But one of the main books directly inspired by Jane Austen on my TBR is Love and Marriage in the Age of Jane Austen by Rory Muir. If you watched my most recent Bath video, you know that I recently bought another book by Rory Muir, and this is his latest release. And as soon as I saw it, that it was kind of coming out this year, I was like, this is the perfect read for me. It has all my favourite things about this era, and I'm just really excited, and also so directly links back to her novels, especially Pride and Prejudice. This book looks at the customs of courtship and marriage in the Georgian era, but also something that I find really fascinating about this era is the idea of spinsterhood for the people who chose not to marry, and that is something in my own kind of like academic interests I've always been really fascinated by, and so I'm kind of glad this is also included in this book as well. I'll stay in the Georgian era for just a little bit longer with The Strangest Family by Janice Hadlow, a book about Queen Charlotte and George III and the Hanoverians. One book, of course, I've been inspired to read because of this book and also linked to Jane Austen is The Other Bennet Sister, also by Janice Hadlow. But I've already talked about that book quite a bit and how I want to read it, and as a part of this video I wanted to talk about books that I haven't probably mentioned before on camera or haven't ever hauled, and just so you then go away hopefully having some new books to add to your wish list that you either haven't heard of or have just always been on your TBR too. The first two books come directly from Janice Hadlow's bibliography. A bibliography at the back of a history book is my favourite thing, and that really inspires a lot of the books I then go on to read. Because I've just talked about Jane Austen, I'll talk about someone who both Jane and I are very fond of, which is Frances Burney. Jane Austen was a massive fan obviously of Frances Burney, and what is so brilliant about Frances Burney is that she was a direct witness to so much of the court ongoings during the reign of George III, and so there are so many references to her diaries and letters in the book itself, in The Strangest Family. If you haven't read Frances Burney before, I wholeheartedly recommend her, especially if you're like a lover of Jane Austen, because she so directly inspired Jane Austen. But one thing, when I studied Frances Burney, I read little kind of sections of her letters and her journals, but really linked to her writing. But when I was reading The Strangest Family, there was just so much about her kind of taking in the political and social landscape of that era, directly linking to the monarch, that I just really wasn't aware of. And so I've already started reading this. I read this a bit in 2023 and dipped in and out, especially when I was reading The Strangest Family, but now in 2024 I really want to, one, just read more Frances Burney in general, but also finish reading her journals and letters. The next book is Princesses, the Six Daughters of George III, and it was clear from reading the bibliography and the acknowledgements and just kind of The Strangest Family in general that Janice Hadlow owes an awful lot to Flora Fraser, but I'd never heard of Flora Fraser before, and now I just am like, why haven't I read her books before, because they're exactly kind of aligned with my interests. So the one that I picked at the moment, or that I own, is about the daughters, because I think from reading The Strangest Family and actually learning more about Queen Charlotte and George, the things that I would find so fascinating is their relationship and this kind of the making of their family and kind of what it meant in that era, and how it has kind of become to be viewed very differently than how they were kind of imagining how their family would be perceived, if that makes sense. And also because we really associate that family with a slight kind of image of failure of the era, where that's kind of viewing George III himself as a failure, which is obviously deeply problematic, but also deeming the heirs as failures or not quite being the right kind of people to rule Britain. George III really wanted his daughters to be these perfect symbols of kind of 18th century womanhood, and over the time, especially with things like the Royal Marriages Act, you can just see how suffocating it would have been to have been any member of that family really, but especially to be a daughter of that family, and look at how the daughters all kind of subverted kind of the norms and expectations of their roles, but also tried really hard to conform to them as well. And they were the people I think I came away just being completely fascinated by. And so when I saw that Flora Fraser had done a book specifically about them, especially because I feel like people don't know anything about them either, I was really excited. The other book by Flora Fraser that I'm also desperate to read is on Queen Caroline, the wife of the Prince Regent, and I am obsessed with their relationship, their divorce, the whole drama of it all. I just think she was an iconic woman, especially when you actually look at Jane Austen's own kind of letters and journals at the time. You know, Jane Austen was really pro-Caroline, and I feel like that's all we really need to know. But I haven't yet actually bought myself a copy of Queen Caroline, mainly because I discovered this in a secondhand bookshop, and I tend to just have a long list of books on my kind of like bibliography list, and whenever I go to a charity shop or a secondhand bookshop, I specifically look for those books, and this is where I found one of them. So I'm going to be on the hunt for that book. Next we have The First Iron Lady by Matthew Dennison, which is a great title, but I can confirm this is the only Iron Lady I will ever like. This is a biography of another Queen Caroline. She was the wife of George II and the grandmother of George III, and she's my favourite queen. She's my favourite queen consort, my favourite royal spouse. We owe so much to her, but we just don't seem to discuss her enough. She made such a brilliant contribution to science, to the Enlightenment, to architecture, just so much I feel like we owe to her, but we just don't, we don't talk about it, and I feel like it's She's one of those figures in history, especially in royal history, that I always want more people to talk about. And I've never actually read a biography just about her before. She's always been the context almost to the Hanoverians and to that era, but never really had enough dedicated to her, so I'm really excited to read this. Now we move on to her grandson with George III, The Life and Reign of Britain's Most Misunderstood Monarch by Andrew Roberts. This is a landmark biography that I wanted to read for a while, but I didn't know whether I wanted to dedicate myself completely to George, hence why I actually started with Strangest family first. I thought if I really love that, then I'll buy and read this, and so that's exactly what I've done. And I've heard so much brilliant stuff about this. I can't wait to kind of just sit and spend some more dedicated, kind of even more kind of in-depth time with this incredibly misunderstood man. Now travel even further back in time with me to the 16th century. Should I have done this video chronologically? Potentially, if I'd actually planned what I was going to say. But here we are in the 16th century. This is another one of my favourite history books I've read in 2023. It is Blood, Fire and Gold, The Story of Elizabeth I and Catherine de Medici by Estelle Paranque. And I actually should have included this in the postscript book tag as the kind of question that's about reading outside my comfort zone, just because I'd never read anything before about Catherine de Medici, and it really started an obsession and wanting to learn a lot more about her. Before I move on to the book on my TBR that is thematically linked to this book, I also have to say that one of the most anticipated reads for me of 2024 will be Estelle Paranque's new book, which is all about Anne Boleyn. I hit that pre-order button so fast. I love her writing, I love her YouTube channel, I just love her passion to this era, and I'm particularly excited to hear more about her thoughts about Anne Boleyn, because she did lots of brilliant videos about Anne Boleyn. But that is definitely one of the books that as soon as it comes out, I'm going to read it so quickly and just devour it and adore it, because I know I will. The book that I was inspired to read after reading Blood, Fire and Gold was Game of Queens, The Women Who Made 16th Century Europe by Sarah Gristwood, because after reading Blood, Fire and Gold, I realised there were just so many women in the 16th century that I just knew nothing about, especially in royal history, because so many of them had direct links to the women who I love reading about, such as Catherine of Aragon, obviously her mother Isabella of Castile, and, you know, Marguerite of Angoulême and Anne Boleyn, but I had never read dedicated histories of them. I'd never really learnt more about them other than their kind of context to particular women. But I realised that all of these women, you know, form a tapestry of each other, and they're all linked and they've all inspired or have been kind of enemies or allies to each other as well. And so I really thought I wanted to read more kind of European history as well, because when we just stick to Britain, especially of this era, it's just really limiting, because Europe was such a powerhouse and had so many powerful women as its queens. Another really enjoyable history book I read last year also really puts this history that I love so much in its European context, and it is Hunting the Falcon, Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn and the Marriage That Shook Europe. I also have to say this is probably one of the most beautiful history book covers I've seen in a long while. I just think it's so striking. Alongside the really important European context that this book kind of focuses on, and the thing that I found most fascinating about this book was actually its research, and its new research especially, into Anne Boleyn's household, especially the women who were with Anne Boleyn just before she was executed, and looking at who and trying to identify who they were and their relationship to Anne, and whether they were allies or enemies kind of thing. And I found that research really interesting. I went to see John Gart and Julia Fox actually talk about this book, and I had no idea that they were a married couple. So when they kind of started and they're calling each other darling, or like a term of endearment, I was like, do they know each other? Which obviously they do, because they wrote a book together, but I just love that they're married. That is, for me, perfect. For a really happily married couple to write a book about the marriage of Henry VIII Anne Boleyn is just such a brilliant concept. During the talk, Julia Fox of course mentioned Jane Boleyn, and I had the realisation that this book, Jane Boleyn, the Infamous Lady of Oxford by Julia Fox, has been on my wish list for a really long time, and I just had never bought it. So when I saw it in a bookshop, literally the next day, it was perfect timing. Jane Boleyn is one of the most controversial figures in Tudor history because of her parts in the downfall of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. And I will admit that for so long, you know, I kind of buyed into this image of her, but I think majority of it is probably, and I know a lot of it is just completely untrue, and actually we have none or very little factual evidence of her involvement. And because of that, I really kind of want to read her and almost reclaim her in my mind as well as everybody else's mind. And I have never really read anything more about Jane Boleyn again, apart from her just being a side figure. So along with Queen Caroline, I think 2024 is going to be the year that I really look at reading landmark biographies of misunderstood and forgotten women in history. Back to a bit of fiction now. Ben and I both read Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. The Wolf Hall series is just one of my all-time favourites, and I've done a dedicated video about why I think Wolf Hall is one of the best historical novels ever written. I'll leave that video below for you. And Ben and I loved reading it actually with him and discussing it with him, and always trying to, because he listened to it on audio, but always trying to like listen out to where he was, because he's obviously heard so much about this history through me that to see him love it and be really interested was just a joy. And of course, something that is on both of our TBR piles, because I said I was going to read it in 2023 and that did not happen because I was not ready for the series to end, is The Mirror and the Light. I have promised Ben, so Ben was just going to start reading it and I was like, no, you can't be, this is my series. You cannot finish it before I do, because Ben is such a fast reader. I know he'd start it and finish it, and then I would then be left kind of unmoored, never reading it. So I've promised Ben that we will actually listen to the audiobook together, because we've got a few kind of long journeys coming up, and so we'll just sit in the car and we'll just put the audiobook on. But I have to read it in 2024, because if not, Ben will get there first, and I cannot let that be the case. Another piece of historical fiction inspired by that timeline, and also inspired by the fact that I read a biography of Thomas Cromwell in 2023, is Dissolution, which is a mystery, a historical thriller, and I'm really excited to read this because of the upcoming series. I think it's upcoming, I don't think it's come out yet, but I obviously in 2023, at the very end of 2022, discovered my love of kind of mystery fiction in general, so I'm really excited to read a thriller set during this time period. Just like how I started this video with one of my favourite authors, I'm going to end it with one of them, which of course is Agatha Christie. In 2023 I read my very first Marple book, and so this has inspired me to not only obviously read the second Marple book, which is The Body in the Library, because I do like to kind of do things chronologically, but also this is because it's one of the most famous of the Marple books. But I also picked up A Murder is Announced, because I feel like this is one of the iconic ones, and I always read the very first book and then I give myself permission to skip around all of the best ones. And so A Murder is Announced is one that I've heard a lot of people talk about, but also when I read the blurb of it, I thought I will adore this. Over the period of my Christmas in 2023, I read Hercule Poirot's Christmas, and this Christmas or winter, I'm going to read Murder on the Orient Express, which is obviously one of the most iconic Agatha Christie novels and probably the most popular Poirot novel, and I'm really excited, but I really feel like this has to be a winter read for me, so I'm excited to kind of snuggle up, get cosy and be terrified by Agatha Christie. I should also say, just in case it's of interest to anybody, that the book I am currently reading, and we are approaching the King's Great Matter, is Catherine of Aragon by Alison Weir, because I recently went to see Alison Weir talk again at the Six Wives of Henry VIII event I went to, and realised that I still haven't read the series and I know I'll really enjoy it, so this is what I'm currently reading. So I need to find another book as a kind of, I guess, a palette kind of cleanser with this one. I always need more than one book on the go, and I don't know if I want to do another Tudor non-fiction, so I think I might go for a Georgian. But anyway, that is what I'm currently reading. So there were the books I've got on my radar, directly inspired by the books I read in 2023. I would love to know if you also see your reading in the same way I do, with kind of every year that comes as kind of like a tapestry, a continuation, a journey, because I'd love to know what you're going to read in 2024 that has been directly inspired by the books you loved, or maybe didn't love, just found fascinating in 2023. I also think this is probably the most history books I've ever featured in one video before, but this is very much my reading. I do tend to read more non-fiction than I read fiction, and I have done since a little girl. When I was a little girl going to the library, you could only get a certain amount of history books because they wanted to keep them back, I guess, for like school history projects, and I never had trouble picking. I was always fine with any limits of fiction, but it was always the history books I struggle with, so this is like a great representation of what my reading year looks like anyway. I really hope you've enjoyed watching it and that a few titles were interesting to you, and I feel like we need to do an emoji, and the only emoji that feels really right is a crown, because there was just so much royal history in this video. So please leave me a crown if you'd like to leave an emoji as a way to say hi at the end of this video. But thank you for watching, and I hope to see you very soon in another video. I should say bookish video, but maybe it'll just be another history video. But yeah, see you soon.